Today, I'm kind of doing an old trend and giving it a twist. I only say kind of old just because I've seen less people use it. Anyway, you remember when artists would draw themselves or their characters into popular drawings? Well, I thought, hey, what if we take it a step further and combine two styles together? While doing this, I learned that it is much more difficult than I expected. Now for this drawing here, I am real quickly creating a base character in my style as a reference, just to avoid taking a character from one thing and just giving it a different style. And while making this, I was kind of in a mythical mood, so I decided to create this goblin demon girl. And if you like my style, you can see more of it on my Instagram. Anywho, let's finish this up to get on with the video. And when I say let's, I mean me. A little demon girl looking like that. Her eyebrows look a little wonky, but that's okay. First up, we are combining the style of Kim Possible and Studio Ghibli. Now, when I was coming up with this idea of combining two styles, I was trying to aim for two styles that were almost completely opposite towards each other. And when I looked at Kim Possible's and Ghibli's, I noticed there was a lot of difference from the line art to one has shading, one doesn't, and also the proportions, which while Studio Ghibli isn't necessarily proportionally correct, it's a lot more accurate than Kim Possible. And one of the things that actually made this challenge really hard for me is that I was trying to combine them through every single process. So like within sketching layer, I could see both styles with line art and with coloring, which in some cases I think slightly backfired me, which you'll see later on. Now, of course, when trying to combine these two styles, I was looking for the most iconic parts, like the filled in lips from Kim Possible, along with the thinner neck and the pupils within the eyes. I also used Kim more for reference for her head, since when I looked back at my character, she had more of a rounder head. And for the Ghibli part, I decided to give her a softer nose and add more shape to her head, so it's not just so round, and also decided to give blush to her cheeks. And for the line art, I was thinking about giving it thicker line art for Kim Possible, but when I started looking at it, I realized it kind of started looking more like the Kim Possible style than Ghibli, so I decided to go with the thinner line. Also for the other two styles, I ended up doing thicker lines, so for more variety, it made more sense to do the thinner lines. Which I'm not a big fan of working with thinner line art, just because it requires a lot more tediousy, but in the end I'm glad I went with the thinner liner. And for coloring, I decided for her skin tone to eye drop Shigo and change it to a bit more of a pink tone since my character is a bit more pink. And as well, I tried to go for like brighter but kind of muted at the same time because like while Ghibli does use genuinely bright colors, they're also a bit more realistic versus Kim Possible, which is very bright. I then also decided to color the line art to represent Kim Possible, which something I've noticed is how the line art is like black for all the outside of the skin, and then on the inside it's all colored, versus the hair it's like completely colored. And since Kim Possible doesn't have any shading, I just went with simple cell shading for Ghibli. And the only form of highlighting that either style has really done was a highlight within the eye, which I decided to go with Ghibli's because that's one that you see more often versus it's occasional in Kim Possible. And pretty much the last thing was the blushes on the cheeks to represent Ghibli. And there she is, looking a lot cuter than I expected. Granted, these styles are generally cute, unlike these next ones that we're gonna be doing. Now we are on to the really bizarre one, which is combining Tim Burton with comic slash pop art. Now I knew this one was gonna be weird, but nothing could have prepared me what I ended up creating. Once again, very different styles. Tim Burton's has very push proportions versus the comic, which has more accurate proportions, and also the comic has a lot more brighter colors versus Tim Burton, which is very muted and also has more of a watercolor feel versus the color block of the comic. And I decided to go for the illustrations Tim Burton had versus the claymation, just because this is 2D that we're doing, as well as the illustrations being more bizarre. Now right off the gate, it was looking a bit more Tim Burton style, so I tried to add the more realistic eyes to add to the comic part, and that was the moment I realized of how weird looking this was. But I knew I couldn't change it because it was already looking so Tim Burton-y, that I just left it. Then for the line art, I decided to try to combine the two by having it very shaky like the Tim Burton style, but also thick like the comic style. Also looking at my first reference, it was using the line art to add some form of shading and depth to it. So I decided to do that, but also keeping it shaking to stick with the Tim Burton style. And since I made the decision to not fully connect all the lines for the hair, I couldn't use the bucket tool, so I had to color that in by hand, as well as the coloring of the lips and the eyes. When I looked at my second reference photo, I noticed that they were putting lines within the hair, so I decided to do that as well. Now on to the next part that gave me a lot of struggle, which was the dotted design for the comic. And that's pretty iconic, so I have to put it in there. I was trying to see if I could find some way of cheating, because that would take forever. And I kind of did. Pretty much, I first tried to see if I could just use the dotting tool and just go back and forth, but that wasn't looking very right, because it's very consistent when you look at it. So I decided to just do a couple of them, and I pretty much copy and paste it until I could completely cover her. It was still kind of uneven, but it looked a lot better than the last option. I also added a little bit of coloring behind the dots because even though it looks like it's plain white in the back, she just looked too pale. And for the shading, I once more made it seem very shaky for the Tim Burton style, and also left it as cell shading just to invoke towards the comic. I also messed with the hair to try and make it look more painterly to invoke towards the Burton style. Then finally, I added highlights to invoke towards the comic style. Even though neither one has highlights within the hair, I felt like it needed a little something else. And there's Tim Burton and pop art. Is it wrong that I think it looks actually pretty okay? Like, it still looks really weird, but it's it's a style. I probably wouldn't recommend it though. Now, I originally didn't want to do Disney because I already did Kim Possible, but then I thought of the feud that happened between Max Fleischer and Walt Disney. Many tend to think Disney as the pioneers of animation, when it was actually Max Fleischer with his brother who brought this form of animation way before Disney, which is quite remarkable how Walt managed to get the public to think that he created this form of animation, eventually leading to Fleischer Studios to be nearly forgotten, leaving one of their characters relevant, Betty Boop. Now, I don't think Max really helped himself in trying to outdo the mouse. While Disney went for a more family-friendly direction, Fleischer Studios had more adult, dark, even demonic themes. So while the concept of trying to combine the two styles seems kind of odd, I thought it would be fun to do. Once again, having pretty different styles, Disney with more proportionally correct characters, and Fleischer Studios having characters that bend and move in very interesting ways. And also, I realized that none of them have necks. That was a weird thing that I realized while doing this. I also specifically chose older Disney movies as references just to make more reference to it being back in the 20s. And I mainly used Betty Boop as the reference since this character is female. The other characters are either like animals or some weird people. For the styles I pulled out of each one, I took the hairline of Betty Boop and then I gave her a neck because I struggled with not giving her a neck. And for the eyes, I made them the shape of Disney's, but then I used the pupil of the old cartoon. For the line art, I ultimately decided that I was going to go for a thicker one for the Fleischer Studios, but then I was going to color it in to represent Disney, along with some thinner lines for like the eyes. And since my character does have color, I ultimately went with Disney and coloring it. And since neither one had shading, this made this whole process really simple. And here's our final one with our little cartoon feud. And here's our final lineup. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.